Hello there, restoration friends. Welcome to March's lesson, which is 3 ways to manage resistance to change. I'm actually really excited about today because, sorry, I'm moving my keys, because here's some real nuts and bolts stuff that you can use even today if you'd like. So I will also say that some of these slides are adapted from a presentation I made to therapists and attorneys and stuff. So I think I got them all to be appropriate to us and here and you, but if not, please forgive me. The content's really good though, so maybe you won't care if some words are out of place here and there. So hi, I'm Jenny. You probably know that already, but I know we've had some new people join. So I'm Jenny, and here's what I've got for you today. So, oh, let me go over here. I'm trying to make the slide go. It's not going. So I don't know if any of you have watched Only Murders in the Building. I binged on it early fall last year. I was out on a medical leave and I was like, of course, I devoured it in about 2 days. But one of the quotes in that show that I think is really applicable today is, if you never take a risk, Howard, your life will stay exactly as it is forever. So entitling this lesson, Ways to Manage Resistance to Change, I'm really trying to get at that idea that if you are kind of stuck in this high conflict relationship, it may mean that you need to take a risk so that your life doesn't stay like this forever. Now, one of the risks you've already taken is to join restoration or whatever else, all the other stuff you've started to do. But I'm going to actually give you some ideas in today's lesson about very concrete risks you can take to see if that starts to change things for you. So I'm going to first say, kind of name 3 resistances, and then I'll come back through and kind of talk about how to manage those things and things you can do to manage them. So the first resistance I think we all have is a laser focus on the other person. So you didn't get to restoration by Googling like how to plant tulip bulbs. You probably got here because you looked up narcissism or personality disorders or toxic relationships or something like that. So while it is a good entry point into doing the work to feel different and better, being focused only on the other person, of that being kind of the way you want to go, is like, this other person did all these horrible things and they continue to do horrible things, and that's where I want my focus to be. You're not actually going to be able to move forward because that is a resistance to change. And I've been in this position where, it has been gently suggested to me, it was gently suggested to me that there were things I could do differently. And I was like, are you flipping kidding me? Like, why do I have to do anything differently? I'm clearly perfect. The other person is clearly the problem. What was not described to me or explained to me was that I might just be perfect. I might be doing everything right, but I can't make that person change. What I can do, though, is change my reactions, change my behaviors around a couple of things, and that will make that person have to adapt. So if you're sitting there, if I was sitting, and I was sitting there waiting for the other person to just like finally get the message and change how they needed to change, I wasn't going to get anywhere. I had to start doing things differently so that that person had to react to me differently. I wasn't going to play the same tape over and over and over again. So one of the resistances to change that you might have is being in this place of, it's the other person, they have to change. They have to be the one to change. I'm not changing. I put this little fake narcissometer on there because sometimes we don't come in that door, but sometimes we do. So if you find like you are on the high end of this very fake narcissometer, anyway, this resistance may be very important for you to address. And I'm going to have some ideas on how to do that in a little bit, but something to think about. You're not letting that person off the hook. You're not saying they're not doing really awful, terrible things. You don't even have to think that they're not at fault. but staying in a place where they're at fault, they have to change, and this is all about them, is not going to help you feel better, even though it feels like it might, and it does temporarily. Okay. Oh, I went to the, oh, well, there we go. Okay, so the second resistance I find in people is being completely invested in your own values. This is going to sound weird, but when we are in high conflict relationships, sometimes we're finally allowed to sort of live our values and be aligned with our values in ways we couldn't when we were in the relationship. And also, most of us are decent human beings. And so we have some core values around empathy, integrity, honesty, needing connection, financial security. When we are very invested in those values, and even more importantly, the other person seeing that those are our values and respecting them, we are vulnerable to participating in the same cycles over and over again. So you might be too invested or completely invested, or maybe unhealthily invested in your own values. If when somebody suggests a change to you, you say, yeah, but. So going back to that focus on the other person, if your value is they can't attack my integrity, they have to have integrity, you are adhering to your value and arguing with them and defending yourself every time they attack your integrity, and also focused on them that they have to fix their integrity. So, and this is kind of what this slide says, a sign that you're too invested in your own values is when somebody suggests an idea or a strategy to you and you can't do it because it doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel like it sits with your values. Another good example is, I have to tell the other person everything because I have a value around trust and honesty. They were always dishonest with me, so I'm going to be sort of overly honest with them. That can put you squarely in the high conflict cycle, because you're saying, like, I'm honest about this and I'm honest about that. And maybe one of the things you're honest about is, like, I have a new partner. That may actually trigger them if they've got narcissistic traits or other personality disorder traits. This is one that I'm happy to talk more about. So if you watch this video and you want another video on the value stuff, I'm happy to do that because I think it's a really important one to address. The third resistance is your own internal conflict. And so you might have a part of you or parts of you that are like, I'm never giving this person an ounce of my attention ever again. And then you've got a part of you that's like, oh, crud, I have to like be in contact with them until we sell the house, or, at an extended family gathering next year, or something like that. So your own internal conflict about what to do, what to say, how to behave, what to feel, can keep you stuck and unable to change because you're constantly having the fight inside of you about what to do next. Or you're choosing a path and then going, that might not have been the right one. And you choose a different path. And you're sort of ping-ponging between paths without actually getting anywhere on those paths. That then becomes a resistance to change. It's not a deliberate one. None of these are deliberate resistances to change, but the internal conflict one ends up functionally being a resistance to change because you can't get past your own parts ping-ponging and arguing inside of you. Okay, so these are, see, this is where they're a little out of order, but we're going to do them anyway. I think that when you can address your resistances, I think that when you do that, you will be uncomfortable. So some of the strategies I'm going to share with you are going to feel uncomfortable. I also firmly believe that if you can like wade into that discomfort, sit in that discomfort, and be consistent in what you're trying to do, you will build resilience and things will feel better. So this slide basically doesn't mean much, except that when you think about the internal conflict, you can look up internal family systems. That'll give you kind of an idea of what I'm talking about with parts stuff. I have adapted it for high conflict relationships, but it's the idea of parts work and the internal conflict. There is a process you can walk through to help you with your internal conflict. So you're not fighting inside of yourself all the time. It's not always comfortable because you have to address parts of yourself that you may not like, that you may be very frustrated with, or other parts that you really, really do like, but they don't allow you to move forward. So you might really like the part that wants to be focused on the other person, but that part doesn't actually let you go somewhere else. So, so one of the ways you can combat that resistance is to actively work with your internal conflict. Okay, so another resilient strategy, which is going to combat some of the resistance, is to try some new communication strategies. And I've actually got a few for you here today. So a couple of things I want to tell you. Prior communication strategies, the prior ways you have tried to address this high conflict relationship with your words don't work. And we know that because they would have already. I am under the assumption that as humans, most of us are able to communicate effectively what we need and want. We can communicate when we're dissatisfied. We can communicate what we think somebody else should do. I think we're all pretty good at that. So if you have been doing that in this high conflict relationship and nothing has changed, or it hasn't changed for a very long amount of time, then what you're doing isn't going to work. Because it hasn't. It would have. If the first time you said to them, like, this really hurts my feelings when you whatever, if that was going to work, they would have said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'll never do that again. So the second piece is that I'm going to give you some new communication strategies that are going to feel counterintuitive. They're going to feel like the opposite of what you should do. Drink water time. And I just want you to hold that it might feel uncomfortable to do these different communication strategies, but also remember the ones you were doing before weren't effective. So let's try something different. I will also tell you that new communication strategies need practice and consistency. So you might try one, it doesn't work, and you're like, well, I'm never doing that one again. I would encourage you to keep trying because I do know that these strategies work. So one of the first strategies I'm just going to pop in here and give you is the strategy of not answering or asking a why question and not defending your decision making through a because answer. This is where all of the trouble is. When you ask the question why, they're going to give you some mumble jumble that you've heard before and isn't still going to make sense. So there's no point in asking the question why. If they ask you why you did something, there's no value in responding to that unless it's something very benign. So to the question like, why did you leave me? You could go through probably 30 minutes of reasons why you left, and everything you give them, they're going to poke holes in. So instead of sort of succinctly ending the conversation, I left you because of all these 50 things, instead you're going to be in an extended conversation because they're going to want to rebut all 50 things. So one communication strategy is if somebody asks you why you whatever, is to be very careful and not answer, I did that because. Instead, you can change how you respond. So somebody says, why did you do that? You could say, you could ignore the question altogether. Like, it's done, so now you need to whatever. You know, I'm using the word whatever a lot. Sorry about that. I'm trying to think of good examples, but I bet you can kind of look back in your relationship or in your ongoing communications and look at the times they've asked you why and you've answered because, and see how that's gone. And then kind of go back through those and look at times they've asked you why and how you could respond differently without answering because. I will also say, if they're asking you a why question that they've asked you 50 times before and you've answered 50 times before, you can ignore that. So if they've asked you, why did you leave me, a bunch of times, and you have given the all of the data points, and they're still asking, I would ignore the question. It's going to feel counterintuitive. It's going to feel like you're a pretty awful person, and I would ignore it anyway. Going back to the values piece, if you keep trying to defend yourself by answering the why question, your value about having integrity and needing to answer and be honest will keep you in the high conflict cycle. It will be working too hard for you. Okay, that's why and because. Also, as often as necessary, switch out and for but, because anytime you say, like you're saying a sentence and you say, I think you did a great job, but in your high conflict relationship, they are primed to not believe you if you say the word but. Everything you said before the but doesn't matter anymore. Like, I think you're a great parent. I really appreciate this and this and this, but you never washed their school uniforms. They don't hear the good stuff. They only hear the but. So I would encourage you to start thinking through those communications. And if it's you're a great parent and you're not washing the uniforms, that's what you say. You're a great parent and the uniforms are going to need washed every day. Not a but. Just try adding it. So some of these examples, I appreciate that you got the kids to school on time last week, but I shouldn't have to remind you every week. One option is, I appreciate that you got the kids to school on time last week, so you don't have to have a second half at all. Or I appreciate that you got the kids to school on time last week, and I think it helped them feel more ready for the day. There you're kind of actually giving two positives, okay? So that's another strategy you can try. Another one is funneling the communications into very few avenues. So if you have texting, social media messaging, email, and phone calls, and maybe some other platform available for the high conflict person to contact you, you have a lot of things you have to be tracking and feeling nervous about, that they could reach you one way, that way, or that way. So you can funnel them into one or two forms of communication. If you're a co-parent with somebody, you can funnel them into Our Family Wizard, which is a nice platform, or I don't know, maybe Two Houses is still around. And phone calls or texts for emergencies. And I have some strategies for how you do that. I mean, basically you kind of say, I'm only going to respond to things you put in Our Family Wizard or I'm only going to respond to emails. So don't text me or call me and leave me voicemails unless it's an emergency. I'm not going to respond to those. And then you cannot respond to them. You also cannot go into email and respond to the voicemail or the text. You can funnel them into communicating with you in just one way so that you know the only thing I have to be worried about is email. Now you'll have to understand that they're going to have some issues with that and they're going to fight it, but it is a way to start setting limits with the high conflict person and being consistent with them. I'm going to tell you a quick little story. I tried this with my ex and I said, I'm not going to text you anymore. This was by text, by the way. I'm only going to respond to things in Our Family Wizard. And he was like, got it. Not 30 seconds later, he texted something about, what time is pickup for the kids or something like that. And I responded. And then he texted me some more stuff. And I was like, oh my, like I literally just set this limit and I didn't even last 30 seconds before I didn't even adhere to my own limit. So I encourage you to be aware that may happen. You might be tempted to not adhere to your limit, and I would encourage you to do so anyway. Otherwise, A, they don't believe you in it, you set limits, and B, you continue to have all these avenues to you that maybe you don't want them to have. Okay, a resilience number 3, another strategy here is the idea of giving things a whirl. So in any of these strategies, any strategies you hear somewhere else, I want you to think of them as not high stakes things to try. So sometimes a resistance is you think the stakes are so high that there's no room for error. So every word, you have to defend everything. You have to wordsmith everything. You have to respond to every phone call, text, email, stop by your house. Like the stakes feel really high. Like if I don't do everything perfectly, I'm going to lose everything I have, including my children. So I'd encourage you to understand that the stakes may not always be as high as kind of that fear part of you thinks they are. So there are a lot of it. You can make a misstep and tomorrow you don't lose your kids. You can say something in a less than perfect way and tomorrow you still have money. There's a longer path to kind of the worst case scenario than we sometimes think there is. So I want you to kind of have this idea of giving things a whirl in your head. You're just going to try some things. I'm not asking you in some of these things to make this like your lifelong, you can never use the word because ever again. I just want you to try sometimes not using the word because and see how it goes. And then you can adjust if necessary. So maybe you have to say the word because, but only about certain things. You know, why didn't you pick up the kids? Well, because there was traffic. Okay, that's fair, right? It also, giving things a whirl allows you to low stakes, try something that might actually create a new and better pattern for you. So I would really think about lowering the temperature, lowering the pressure on you so that you can feel like you have some wiggle room to try a few things for yourself. And this kind of goes along with that. Give yourself a permission to have a do-over. Try some of these things. If they don't work and you know exactly why it didn't work, but you're willing to try again, do it over. Try again. Give yourself a little grace if it doesn't work, that you might still have to just try the same thing a few times until it does work. So analyze what's working, what isn't working. Did it work to leave out the but? Did it work to not answer because? I do want you to understand that sometimes it takes multiple tries. You are probably working in entrenched patterns with the high conflict person. So these are not patterns that are going to be immediately switched overnight. The other person is very invested in you doing your half of the spiel, right? They're very invested in, if they poke at you, you defend yourself. If they ignore you, you come begging for attention. If they yell at you, you change your mind. They're very invested in that. That's the pattern that has happened. You are going to be making changes to the pattern. They're not going to quite believe that at first. So to use, well, at the time of this taping, a recent example. So when a train car goes off the tracks, the train cars behind it are still trying to stay on the track and trying to go forward. Then they hit this, train car that's off the track, and then things start falling off the track. It's when the first car goes off the track, the rest of the cars don't lay down and fall off the track. It's the same thing here. You're going to try something different. You're going to be the car that falls off the track. The other person's going to keep like, oh, but I'm still going straight because I'm on the track. They're going to have to eventually figure it out. They can't keep going straight because one of the cars has changed. So that's a way to think about that. And at the time of this taping, we've had like 4 derailments all over the country and Europe. within like a 2-week period. Okay, resilience number 5, this is another strategy you can do, is to play this adapted bingo game. So if the high conflict person is someone who uses a lot of the same phrasing and like they're always poking at parenting time or money or where you're going to live or what kind of character you have, I encourage you to print off a blank bingo sheet. It's a 5x5. You can make one if you don't want to print one off. I want you to write in those squares anything that they seem to frequently do. Do they say, I'm tired of being your financial safety net? Do they, are they repartnered and they use the words, what we call the royal we? So they say, well, we've made decisions, it's them and their new partner. If this is a family relationship, is there a triangulation that goes on? Is there a guilt trip that happens? Are there the same kinds of phrases that usually get to you and then you do whatever it is they want? Sometimes it's a throat clearing. Sometimes it's a, I don't know, crying when it works for them to cry. So I'd encourage you to write down as many of those as you can. And then when you have communications with the other person that you may or may not be nervous about, have that sheet handy. Don't bring it out if they're there. You don't want them to see it. But see if you can get a coverall or get a bingo or something. This does a few things. One, I want you to see that this person, this high conflict person that you're in relationship with of some kind, only has 25 or fewer tricks that they can use. They don't have an unending well of ways to torment you. They have the same ways that have worked that they keep using over and over and over again. They're not as clever as they think they are. So that's one. Secondly, it takes away some of the stress of having communication with them, because now you're not waiting for the blows to happen. You're looking for them, because you've got you in your mind, you're like, say it, come on, do the royal we, come on, say that I'm going to be broke. I dare ya, because you know, all they're doing is confirming for you that they're like 20 trick ponies. You know, they're just not that dangerous. It brings them down in stature. And if you get a bingo or whatever, you can give yourself a little treat. But the idea is that high conflict people tend to get really big in stature in our minds because they've caused so much torment and sadness and hurt and anger, and they've wrecked so many things. And yet they're not an unending pit of that. Once you know kind of the ones that they have, you can start to design your responses to those things in ways that are better for you, right? Okay, so I can't believe I did this in a half an hour, by the way. I thought I was going to be still talking an hour and a half from now. I would like you to think about trying something. Is it that you really need to kind of reduce your focus on the other person? Do you need to maybe not look up narcissism for a day or a week? Do you need to not participate in a group that is all focused on the other? Is there a way for you to kind of accept that's how they are, they're not changing, so that you can move on to other ways that are going to benefit you? So that's one thing you could try, is reducing your focus on the other. Another thing you can try is examine how your values may be getting in the way of moving forward. I'm going to give you 5 core values, and that I want you to think about these 5 values for you and how they play into the high conflict relationship. So one is empathy. A lot of times people who are in high conflict relationships identify as being an empath. When you're an empath, you're going to give the other person the benefit of the doubt more often than you're going to give that to yourself. So I want you to explore that. Integrity. We are often people of integrity, And so when someone questions our integrity by accusing us or whatever, we tend to want to defend ourselves. I would encourage you to just notice how you feel if your integrity gets attacked and what you do. And if you can avoid defending yourself, I'd encourage you to try that. The next one is trust and honesty. So if this is a value of yours, you might sometimes be giving too much information to the high conflict person because it feels honest. You might also be over trusting the other person and not trusting yourself enough, because we're sort of taught that we should trust people. So those two things, honesty and trust, I want you to reflect on how those are playing in this relationship. The next one is connection. As humans, we have a need for connection with other humans. If our value about being connected, which means not cutting somebody off, not blocking their phone number, not blocking them on socials, if that's causing you to have too much contact with the high conflict person, then that value is kind of getting in the way. You can have connection to a lot of other people. You don't need to have open, unending contact and connection with somebody who is not good for you. And then the last one is security. Typically, I think of this as financial security. Sometimes in high conflict relationships, we have a financial enmeshment. And so if your value is to not live in a box, then you might be willing to give away anything and everything you have just so you can like live one step above the box, because you're so afraid that if I fight this person, I'm going to only have the box. So I think that value of financial security actually sometimes causes us to not spend money how we should on a good therapist, on a good attorney, or whatever. So that would be the fifth one to think about. All right, that's what I have for you this time. I didn't actually even look to see what April's is supposed to be, but I'm sure I'll have something for you. All right. Oh, you're going to have to be with me on this little journey here. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. And please put anything in the chats or whatever about if questions you have, some clarifications you need, if you have ideas for parts of this one that you'd like to see expanded into another lesson, I'm happy to do that. Okay, now I'm trying to find the end button. All right, I hope you take care. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.